Imagine this. You're 38 years old, standing in the kitchen, gripping a coffee mug as your partner walks out during yet another argument. You say the same words, hear the same silence. Again, a familiar loop unfolds, predictable, suffocating. Later, you sit alone, dazed, and whisper to yourself, "Why does this always happen to me?" The more troubling question is, why does this feel like it was always meant to happen? Here lies the unsettling paradox. Most of us live as if we are free, yet we walk a path that was unconsciously charted for us before we even learned how to tie our shoes. You are not simply reacting to life, you are fulfilling a story, a script written in the obscure ink of childhood experience. This script is not a fairy tale. It's a complex, layered psychological manuscript authored by the fragmented perceptions of a child trying to make sense of love, danger, neglect, praise, fear, abandonment, control, or indulgence. It is written without your consent, reinforced without your awareness, and, unless examined, performed without your control. Carl Jung once warned, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Childhood scripting is this very unconscious, a blueprint of behavior, desire, expectation, and self-worth. It shapes not just how we see the world, but how we believe the world sees us. Picture this. A boy is scolded every time he cries, told that real men don't show weakness. Fast forward to adulthood, and he becomes a man who feels nothing when his marriage ends, but drinks alone each night. A girl praised only when she obeys becomes a woman who fears conflict and says yes, even when she's breaking inside. These are not random psychological quirks. These are rehearsed roles in a drama we don't even know we're acting in. And the plot thickens, because the script is not merely about your behaviors, but about the deeper narrative beneath them. Who am I allowed to be? What is my value? What must I do to be loved? These are not conscious reflections. They are primal, emotionally embedded answers coded deep into our neural architecture. Neuroscience confirms what philosophers have suspected for centuries. The developing child internalizes emotional experiences before they can even verbalize them. These become implicit memories, emotional templates, informing our future decisions, even as we convince ourselves we are being logical. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what if your why isn't really yours? What if it was implanted? A child's why often becomes an adult's prison, one defined by survival instincts, not freedom. Approval became safety. Achievement became identity. Control became a shield against chaos. These adaptive strategies, necessary in childhood, mature into rigid dogmas in adulthood. The result? We repeat cycles that feel inescapable, yet entirely familiar. This is the invisible gravity of your childhood script. It pulls you back into similar relationships, same outcomes, same self-sabotage. The child who learned love means caretaking becomes the adult who attracts takers. The one who learned, "I'm only noticed when I'm perfect," becomes the chronic overachiever, terrified of stillness. The script doesn't evolve with time. It only gets more polished, more invisible. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that a person can do what they will, but they cannot will what they will. In other words, you may think you're choosing freely, but the very desires you chase are shaped by experiences you didn't choose. That's the heart of the childhood script. It controls not just your actions, but your definitions of success, love, safety, and identity. But what makes it even more insidious is how well it hides. It shows up in self-help goals, New Year's resolutions, and even therapy journeys. You may change your scenery, job, or relationship, but if the inner narrative remains unchallenged, you're just putting new actors into old roles. The play continues, just dressed in different costumes. So the question becomes, if your childhood wrote the first draft of your life, who's revising it now? Are you even aware that a script exists, that you are reenacting a drama that once kept you safe but now holds you hostage? This script isn't evil. It was survival. But survival is not the same as living. In the next section, we'll begin dissecting the architecture of these childhood scripts, how they are written, who writes them, and why they are so emotionally magnetic that we keep returning to them, even when they hurt. It begins innocently, An offhand comment, a lingering silence, a pattern of praise or punishment. Over time, these moments crystallize into beliefs. I must be quiet to be loved. Anger is dangerous. My needs are too much. The child does not analyze, argue, or resist. The child absorbs. This is the soil from which the script grows. But who are the architects of this silent manuscript? The obvious answers come first: parents, guardians, teachers, siblings. But these are not mere people. In a child's psyche, they are gods. They shape the weather of your emotional world. When they smile, the sun shines. When they withdraw, the sky collapses. Love is oxygen. The child will contort themselves endlessly to keep it flowing. This is not manipulation. It is survival. Aldous Huxley observed, "Experience is not what happens to a man. It is what a man does with what happens to him." Yet in childhood, we are not equipped to do much with experience. We feel it, we internalize it, and most importantly, we interpret it in deeply personal, often irrational ways. Parent stress becomes my fault. Their absence becomes I'm not worth staying for. Their overprotection becomes the world is dangerous. Even well-meaning parents contribute to the script. The mother who constantly rescues may instill helplessness. The father who demands excellence may build a perfectionist with a fragile sense of worth. And in families where emotional expression is shunned, children may learn that vulnerability equals weakness. The script isn't born only from trauma. It can also be born from subtle, repeated emotional cues: smiles withheld, affection granted conditionally, praise tethered to performance. Then there are the broader architects: culture, religion, school, media. Each of these institutions teaches what is acceptable, valuable, and desirable. The child's developing identity is bombarded with implicit messaging. Be strong, not soft. Be good, not real. Be agreeable, not disruptive. These messages don't pass through conscious filters. They slip into the psyche and calcify into identity. Consider a child growing up in a household where anger is punished and silence is praised. That child may become an adult who cannot assert boundaries, who freezes when conflict arises. They may become the colleague who burns with resentment but says nothing, the partner who smiles while slowly collapsing inside. And when the cost of repression becomes too great, they may explode in ways that feel out of character, but were, in truth, scripted decades ago. Jean-Paul Sartre declared, "Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself." A powerful idea, but what of the parts of ourselves that were constructed before we had the power to choose? Sartre, for all his existential brilliance, perhaps underestimated the gravitational pull of the early narrative. Before you make yourself, you are made by others. You become fluent in a language of identity that wasn't yours to begin with. Viktor Frankl, who saw the worst of human suffering, reminded us, between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. The tragedy of the childhood script is that it often shrinks this space to a sliver. Our responses become automatic, reflexive, conditioned. A tone of voice triggers shame. A look of disappointment sparks panic. We're not responding to the present, we're reacting to ghosts. It is here that we must introduce another silent architect: the child themselves. The child is not a passive vessel. They make meaning. They draw conclusions. They invent rules. If I don't speak, they won't yell. If I always help, they'll keep me around. These self-written clauses become gospel, governing adult behavior long after the original context has faded. Even trauma, when too immense to process, becomes woven into the script. A child cannot say, "My parent failed me." That truth is too dangerous. So instead, they say, "I was too much. I deserved it. I have to fix everything." These lies, born of necessity, become the bars of an adult emotional prison. And so the architects write, and the child revises, and the script becomes a life. This is not about blame. This is about understanding. Once we see the origins, we begin to reclaim authorship. But first, we must examine the nature of the roles we were assigned to play. In the next section, we'll uncover these roles: the hero, the caretaker, the scapegoat, the invisible one, and explore how these archetypes continue to dictate our adult behaviors, relationships, and even our sense of self. There's a strange moment, often in midlife, where a person pauses and realizes they've been playing a role that doesn't quite fit. The achievements feel hollow. The relationships feel strained. The joy, if it exists at all, is fleeting. And beneath it all lies a creeping sensation. This isn't who I really am. But who are you, if not the role you've always played? In the architecture of the childhood script, roles emerge early and solidify quickly. These are not chosen identities. They are survival strategies. A child senses what is rewarded, what is punished, and most importantly, what is needed. Out of this need, they assume a role, like an actor stepping onto a stage without knowing the play. The performance becomes second nature, and decades later, it still runs. Let's begin with the hero, often the eldest child, or the one who feels the burden of rescuing the family from dysfunction. The hero excels. They strive. They become perfectionists. On the surface, they are successful, responsible, and admired. But underneath, exhaustion, terror of failure, a profound fear that if they stop performing, they will cease to matter. The hero's identity is performance-based. They do not ask for help. They are the help. But even heroes need saving. Then comes the caretaker, the emotional support system of the family. This child learns to read moods, soothe tensions, and keep peace. Their needs are secondary. Their feelings are suppressed. In adulthood, they become the empathic friend, the accommodating partner, the one who gives endlessly and secretly resents it. They often attract narcissists or emotionally unavailable partners, unconsciously reenacting the very imbalance they were raised in. The caretaker fears abandonment, and so they overgive, overfunction, and eventually overbreak. The scapegoat, by contrast, is the identified problem. This child acts out, rebels, or becomes the family's emotional dumping ground. But behind the defiance is often deep pain. The scapegoat carries the family's unspoken dysfunction. They may become addicts, rebels, or perpetual failures, not because they are flawed, but because the role they inherited was to absorb blame. Jean-Paul Sartre said, "If you are lonely when you're alone, you are in bad company." The scapegoat often knows this loneliness too well, the kind that begins when your mere presence is treated as a threat. And then there's the invisible one, quiet, compliant, emotionally self-sufficient. This child disappears in plain sight. They don't make waves. They don't demand attention. They slip through the cracks. In adulthood, they may struggle with intimacy, voice, and visibility. Their needs are faint whispers. They are often overlooked, not because they lack worth, but because they once believed invisibility was safer than being seen. These roles aren't random. They are precise adaptations. Like characters in a play, each one balances the system. The hero overfunctions while the scapegoat underfunctions. The caretaker manages emotions while the invisible one retreats. Together, they maintain a fragile homeostasis in a dysfunctional environment. Carl Jung believed that we all wear masks or personae to function in society. But when the mask fuses with the self, it becomes a prison. These childhood roles are masks we forgot how to take off. We confuse them for our identity, but they are only fragments, shadows cast by the child we once were, trying to survive. And here's the tragic irony. These roles are not static. They evolve. The hero becomes the workaholic CEO, always proving worth. The caretaker becomes the exhausted mother who can't say no. The scapegoat becomes the adult who unconsciously sabotages every good thing they receive. The invisible one becomes the partner who feels unloved but can't express why. Arthur Schopenhauer suggested that a man can do what he wills, but not will what he wills. Our adult desires, our compulsions, our choices, they are often repetitions, echoes of a childhood role we never resigned from. And the more unconscious they are, the more power they wield. But roles can be broken, not through rebellion, but through awareness. You must ask, who did I become to survive? Who would I be if I didn't have to fulfill that function anymore? These are dangerous questions. They threaten the entire structure of your inner narrative. But they are necessary, because no script can be rewritten until the cast steps out of character. In the next section, We will explore the emotional consequences of living in these roles, the depression that won't lift, the anxiety that makes no sense, the chronic dissatisfaction that success cannot satisfy. We will look into the emotional undercurrents of a life lived on autopilot, and what happens when the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. You wake up with a weight in your chest. No specific reason, just heaviness. You move through your day with practiced efficiency, yet underneath every task there's an invisible pressure. You smile at the right times, say the right things, achieve what's expected, and still it doesn't feel like living. It feels like managing. What you're feeling isn't laziness. It isn't weakness. It's the emotional cost of living someone else's story. When we follow a script written in childhood, we pay for it with our feelings. We suppress what's real to maintain what's expected. But the body never forgets. Over time, emotional energy becomes misdirected. Anxiety where there is no danger, sadness without a clear loss, anger that leaks out in sarcasm or sudden rage. These are the symptoms of a self that was never allowed to fully form. Carl Jung described neurosis as the suffering of a soul which has not discovered its meaning. But what if the soul isn't lost, just buried beneath roles that were never meant to last a lifetime? A person raised to be the hero may live with a gnawing sense of failure, even after remarkable success. Why? Because their self-worth was built on achievement, not authenticity. No trophy can fill the void of conditional love. Their anxiety stems not from external pressure, but internal fear. If I stop being excellent, I stop being lovable. The caretaker may wrestle with depression, not because their life is falling apart, but because they've never felt entitled to their own joy. Always tending to others, they live in quiet emotional starvation. They may not even recognize their sadness. It manifests as numbness, fatigue, or apathy. They've learned to dismiss their needs so effectively that when they finally feel them, it's terrifying. Then there's the scapegoat, often branded as the troublemaker. Their emotional world is a war zone. Rage, shame, resentment. But much of this is inherited emotion. The family's unprocessed trauma, absorbed like a sponge. Their adult relationships tend to repeat chaos because chaos feels familiar. Peace feels foreign, even unsafe. They may crave love but sabotage it, not out of malice, but out of unconscious allegiance to their old role. The invisible one often suffers in silence. Their emotional pain is ghost-like. Vague disconnection, dissociation, a chronic feeling of being other. In groups, they feel unseen. In relationships, they feel misunderstood. They rarely trust their own emotional instincts because no one ever mirrored them back. Their depression isn't always sadness. It's emotional invisibility. These emotional patterns are not personal failures. They are logical outcomes of scripts that demanded suppression, perfection, sacrifice, or disappearance. The tragedy is not just the roles we played, but the feelings we learned to exile in order to play them. Jean-Paul Sartre famously said, "Hell is other people, but the deeper hell is internal, the torment of knowing you're not truly yourself and not knowing how to become so." Viktor Frankl offered a powerful antidote. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. But what if the part of you that needs changing isn't broken, but buried? What if your depression isn't a malfunction, but a protest? A revolt of the self against the script? Symptoms are signals. Anxiety, depression, addiction, compulsiveness, these aren't just disorders. They are encrypted messages. Your soul trying to communicate through the only language it was given. Discomfort. When you ignore them, they scream. When you listen, they lead. But listening takes courage. It means pausing the performance. It means questioning the beliefs that feel like reality. It means asking not what's wrong with me, but what truth am I avoiding? What emotion did I once learn was unacceptable? This is why healing is not simply about talking through memories. It's about re-entering the emotional world of the child and reclaiming what was suppressed. It's about integrating the parts of yourself you had to amputate to survive. It's about becoming emotionally whole, not perfect, not invulnerable, but whole. In the next section, we will dive deeper into this process of awakening. The moment when the script begins to crack, when the role becomes unbearable, and when the pain becomes too loud to ignore. We'll explore how breakdown often becomes breakthrough, and what it means to reclaim authorship of your life. Something breaks. Maybe it's a divorce, a panic attack, an unexpected betrayal. Maybe it's something quieter. An ordinary day when you realize you feel nothing, or everything. You can't keep pretending. The mask is too heavy. The role you've played for decades begins to suffocate you. This is the awakening. Not the kind found in glossy self-help books, but the raw, disorienting unraveling of a narrative that no longer fits. The childhood script begins to tear at the seams. The carefully rehearsed lines fall flat. And for the first time, you hear a different voice. A whisper beneath the noise. This isn't who I really am. But here's the paradox. The awakening often begins with collapse. The hero burns out. The caretaker is left by everyone they sacrificed for. The scapegoat lands in rehab or jail. The invisible one finally screams. What looks like failure from the outside is, in truth, an inner revolution. Friedrich Nietzsche called it the long, dark night of the soul. He wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. The chaos is not madness. It is the truth surfacing after years of repression. The soul doesn't whisper forever. Eventually, it roars. And yet, this awakening is terrifying. Because even if your role was painful, it was familiar. The script may have wounded you, but it also gave you identity, belonging, and a map for survival. Without it, you feel unmoored. Who are you if you're not the one who fixes, pleases, rebels, or disappears?" Arthur Schopenhauer remarked, "Mostly it is loss which teaches us about the worth of things. But the most painful loss is often the death of a false self. When you begin to realize that the life you've built was based on unspoken contracts you never agreed to, the grief is immense. You don't just mourn time lost. You mourn the child who made those silent agreements just to be safe. This is when many people panic and try to retreat. They double down on the script, go back to the toxic relationship, overcommit at work, medicate the pain instead of investigating it. Because healing is not a straight path. It is a spiral. You revisit the same wounds, but each time from a deeper place of awareness. But if you stay, if you resist the pull to numb or run, you begin to see. Not all at once, but in fragments. You notice how your voice changes around authority. How you avoid eye contact when you ask for something. How you apologize for existing. These are clues. Breadcrumbs leading back to the original wound. Carl Jung believed that awakening required a descent into the unconscious, the parts of us we exile. He called it shadow work. You must face not only your pain, but your rage, envy, pride, and hunger. You must embrace the parts of yourself you were told were unlovable. Only then can you integrate them. Only then can you begin to live, not perform. This phase, the cracking open, is sacred. It is not a breakdown. It is a breakthrough. But it feels like death because something is dying. The lie. The lie that you had to be someone else to be safe. The lie that you were only valuable if you sacrificed yourself. The lie that your worth was earned, not inherent. Viktor Frankl once said, "What is to give light must endure burning." Your awakening is the fire. It burns away illusion. It incinerates the old roles. And in the ash, you begin to find something strange and miraculous. A self. Not the polished version others approved of. Not the fractured child frozen in time. But the real, complicated, paradoxical you. Still becoming, still unfolding, but finally free to write a new script. In the final section, we will explore the process of reclamation, how to rewrite the script, integrate the truth, and begin to live from a place of conscious choice rather than unconscious compulsion. Because awareness is only the beginning. Authorship is the act of becoming. Rewriting a life is not like rewriting a novel. It's not tidy. There's no delete key for your past. The childhood script, with its rigid lines and inherited roles, still echoes in your mind long after the awakening. But now, you no longer mistake the script for truth. And that changes everything. You begin with questions. What do I believe about love? And where did that belief come from? Why do I panic when I rest? Why do I need to fix everyone? Who taught me that I am too much or not enough? the work of rewriting doesn't begin with answers. It begins with the courage to question the framework. As Viktor Frankl observed, when a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. To rewrite the script, you must step out of distraction and into meaning. You stop running. You stop performing. You start remembering. Rewriting the script means challenging deeply encoded beliefs. Beliefs like, I have to earn love. If I fail, I'll be rejected. My needs are a burden. I am only valuable when I'm useful. You don't erase these beliefs by force. You expose them. You trace them back to their origin. You meet the child who first formed them, not to judge them, but to understand. You look at your pain not as a weakness, but as a map. Every trigger, every breakdown, every repeated pattern points to a place in you that's asking to be reclaimed. The real work begins here, not in theory, but in practice. You set a boundary and feel the terror of disappointing someone. You cry in front of a friend and feel the old shame rise like a tidal wave. You say no and then sit with the guilt, not because you've done wrong, but because you were trained to equate self-care with selfishness. This is the cost of authorship. It is emotional. It is slow. It is sacred. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." That privilege is earned not by resisting your script, but by understanding it so deeply that it no longer controls you. You don't need to kill your past. You need to liberate yourself from it. The people you love may not recognize this new version of you. They might resist it. You were predictable before. Now you're real. You stop being the fixer, the quiet one, the overachiever. You become someone who sometimes disappoints others in order to honor yourself. You stop being an actor in someone else's play. You also begin to write new roles, not for performance but for expression. You become the adult who reparents the inner child, who speaks up, who feels anger without shame, who finds joy without permission. This is not regression. This is integration. Nietzsche wrote, "Become who you are." He wasn't prescribing a linear journey. He was pointing to a lifelong process of unbecoming what you were told to be so you can reclaim the raw material of who you've always been. And with that reclamation comes power. The power to choose partners who don't mimic your childhood wounds, to pursue work that aligns with your essence, to live in ways that feel meaningful rather than obligatory. You stop chasing the shoulds and begin to listen to the whisper of your deeper self. It was never gone, only silenced. The rewritten script isn't perfect. It's not a Hollywood ending. It's honest, and that honesty births freedom. You no longer live on autopilot. You no longer confuse survival patterns with identity. You no longer perform to be loved. You reveal yourself to be known. You won't always get it right. You'll sometimes regress. But even your regressions will be conscious now. And that's the difference between being trapped in a story and choosing your next sentence. In the end, this journey is not about becoming someone new. It's about returning to who you were before the world convinced you to be someone else. It's about finding the place inside you that remembers joy before it was transactional, love before it was conditional, and truth before it was edited. You don't erase the script. You outgrow it. And from that place of growth, you finally write the story you were always meant to live, not as a character in someone else's tale, but as the author of your own.